started.
Okay, let me know when you start.
Western Broome Environmental Stakeholders Coalition, and we're looking for an update from Jess Leclerc from the DEC. Welcome, Jess. She drove down today from Albany, and she's the new project engineer, or project lead for the DEC, and she took Alex Shahanik's place. And, you know, we're all very familiar with Alex, and that happened within this last year. So she has a little bit of work to get up to speed, and we'll help her do that, I'm sure. So she has a prepared presentation of about 15 minutes. So if you could save the questions until the end, and then we'll take, you know, all the time we need. All right?
Thank you.
Thank you, Jess.
Frank, you should mention, as a spokesperson, are you not a chemical engineer in your own right?
I'm a chemical engineer,
Yes.
yeah. I'm a professional engineer. I don't think you need
I don't
that.
need the mic?
No.
Okay.
Yeah. I brought my speaker, and I figured out how to use it, so that if we had any people that needed it, like I wouldn't need it. Okay.
Well, thank you for the introduction, Frank. As he said, I'm taking over from Alex. So IBM Endicott got handed to me about 4 or 5 months ago. So I'm really trying to get myself up to speed so that I can answer questions like Alex had information off the top of his head. I don't necessarily have any answers off the top of my head because I haven't reviewed all the reports and been intimately involved with the remediation aspects that Alex was. So just bear that in mind, please. So this is just a general overview of the site. You guys are all very familiar with this, I'm assuming. You know what parts are IBM. OUs 1 and 2, we usually do together. It's the railroad corridor source area and the North Street area. It's all the on-site area, but it's separated because of the railroad tracks. That's why they're two, but they're going to be remediated and worked on together. So we usually combine the two of them. OU3 is the off-site plume, where most of the soil vapor issues and the mitigation areas were. OU4 is the off-site plume area that came from the IDO cleaners. OU5 is building 57 area. OU6 is the bedrock groundwater plume from the site. And OU7 is the northwest area. So we're first going to talk about OUs 1 and 2, that way if anybody has to go, they can. Just a general approach that was taken for OU 1 and 2. In the early 1980s, they did some soil excavations and some denapple recovery right on site. They also started the groundwater extraction system, which has been running now for 35 plus years. And then they also put in the different groundwater transfer systems and the different treatment buildings around Endicott. There's Garfield, I can't think of all of them off the top of my head. There's 4, I believe. And they also did the sewer study to determine whether or not the sewers were connected to the groundwater and if that was a contributing factor or not as well. Currently right now, IBM is finalizing the focus feasibility study, which will give us the different options for selecting remedy at OU 1 and 2. That is due in at the end of the year. So they'll be coming to us with a study of all the different options that they think are possible at OU 1 and 2, and then we'll look at it and kind of go from there. So there'll be another PRAP and ROD, which is PRAP is the proposed remedial action, where the department will select what we feel the correct remedy is going to be for 1 and 2. We present it to the public. The public has 30 days to comment on it, and then we finalize and select the remedy. So that will probably be happening in 2019, because the feasibility study won't be coming in until probably late 2018. So by the time we look at everything, probably 2019 will be when we'll be doing the PRAP and ROD process. But just kind of an overview. This is the TCA concentrations from the site back in 1980, and this is where we are currently. Back in 1980, there was 4 areas that had concentrations greater than 50,000 parts per billion. And currently, we only have 2 areas with the concentrations above 50. One of the here. The plume that was over the 5 part per billion, which is the light green, has decreased significantly overall area-wise. And the plume that was greater than 500 part per billion is absent below North Street to the west of Washington and McKinley. So it's coming as well. And this is the concentration plots for the TCE. And again, you can see the concentrations have decreased by an order of 3 orders of magnitude from the 50,000 part per billion. It was in the center of the site. Now those have pretty much all diminished and everything's being connected down. Extraction. And again, we've also seen this is the changes for PCE and the groundwater related to 1 and 2. And again, the concentrations have decreased by more than 2 orders of magnitude since 1980. Vapor intrusion at the site. They went and evaluated 14 more of the buildings on site. And they're currently also in the process of working with Huron and the different occupants of the groups to work on monitoring the HVAC adjustments, what they can do with the HVAC adjustments versus indoor air, and if they can change the HVAC to meet the indoor air numbers for DOH, which is 2 micrograms per cubic meter for TCE now, which is lower than it was previously. So they're in the process of making the adjustments to see if they can meet it or not, and if they can't meet it, then they have to put in systems. And right now, they're currently in the process of, we approved their conceptual design, and they're currently in the process of installing SVE systems in buildings 45 and 46, and a sub-slab depressurization building in building 42. These are expected to be completed by the middle of this year, or in 2018. So the middle of this year, that's expected. They're working with the companies in some of the spots where these systems are going to be going in. They have to do an off shift, so they're not interfering with, the company's activities and stuff. So that's their negotiations with them.
Now, what is SVE? Can you,
Soil vapor extraction system.
soil vapor extraction?
The sub-slab systems, right?
Yeah, it's another one of the sub-slab systems. Then the SSDS is a sub-slab system. It's just, they're 2 different systems. One is specifically for, it goes underneath the slab to pull everything out. So they're the 2 different systems.
You
Yeah.
said building 42,
Yes.
because I heard 46.
Yep, 46 has the SVE system. 45 and 46 have the SVE systems going in, and 42 has the SSD system.
I guess I don't understand the different systems either. I know they fry the ground, they
Well,
sub-slabs.
no, the SSD systems, neither one of these fry the ground. It's pretty much applying a vacuum to pull the vapors out from underneath the building, and then they get treated. But I believe it's building 42 has trenches. Like most of the houses that have the systems has the SVE systems, which are very small systems. It goes on the stack goes on the outside of the house. It gets vacuumed out and it's fine. The SSD system, based on the building construction, I believe with building 42 there was tunnels under the building, I believe. So in order to get full control of the vapors underneath the building, they had to put in a more robust system, I guess is the way of putting it. The SSD is a more robust system than the SVE system is.
And how do you pronounce SSD? What does that stand for?
Sub-slab depressurization system.
If I may.
Yep.
So the sub-slab depressurization just basically uses a fan to suck underneath, and it's just a small vacuum. The other one, the SVE, they've used in other places, and they found that they can actually use a vacuum pump to extract. It's a higher vacuum. They can actually extract the vapor.
No plans for 18?
Based on the data, I'd have to go back and look. This is a report that came in, my Alex is here, so I will make a note to go back and look at 18. Because I can't tell you off the top of my head what the numbers were. I know these were These were buildings that were selected based on the numbers that were done during the work plan that was done in 2015.
Now, if it's being extracted, it's just going out into the atmosphere?
Nope, they all have treatment systems. There's some type of treatment system on them, so that it's,
It still goes to the air.
yes, but
'Cause
it's treated. It still goes to the air, but it's
Before this meeting's
treated.
over, I'm gonna ask you if you're testing ambient air around here. So that's a guarantee.
Yeah, right.
Okay. Building needs- okay. So these are just the buildings that they did the sub-slab, or the vapor intrusion in, and actually, I don't see building 18 on there, so I will go back and look as to what was going on in building 18. That was not one of the ones that was on this list.
Now, this is on the Huron campus?
Yes,
Yeah, it's all the urine.
The old IBM buildings?
yep, the old IBM building.
Because don't you have it, don't you also have it at homes?
Yeah. You know, I was just wondering why.
Okay.
Clean most of that up.
I'll-
Now
I
we're
will
focusing
look
on
into
the,
it.
And that
underneath the IBM buildings.
Okay, I will definitely look and figure out what the data was that showed it. This is just the indoor air data from 2005 versus 2016. As you see, most of the buildings in 2016 met DOH's indoor air guidance of 2 for TCE, except for the yellow dots were, and those are the buildings that are getting systems.
And they're getting what kind of systems?
The SVE or the SD systems. OU3, the offsite plume. The approach was to do groundwater extraction for the majority of OU3, and then they also started injecting clean water to further flush the soils and try to get as much contaminant out of the soils as they could for their partitioning. They put in new treatment buildings, they put in new piping. From the report from last year, the groundwater extraction, they extracted 270 million gallons last year, or not last year, in 2016, and injected 245 million gallons of clean water into the aquifer. So far with OU3, they met their 5-year goal, which was to reduce the dissolved mass by 50%, and they've also met their 10-year goal of reducing it by 80%. So as of 2015, they had a 99% reduction of dissolved TCE and a 98% reduction of the average concentration. The average concentration has dropped from 79 part per billion in 2004 to 1.4 part per billion in 2016.
Say the last figure, please.
1.4. And this is just showing the TCE concentrations in the groundwater offsite compared to 2004 when they started doing the extraction and the injections versus 2016. The southern part has definitely cleaned up, as you can see.
It was helped by that last flood, Alex said, right?
Yeah, you know, sometimes everything helps. It just kind of keeps everything flushing. Actually, I'm going to go back to that now. But based on this, because we're not really seeing the benefits of injecting the clean water anymore, we told them that they could stop doing the injections at the end of October of last year. So they stopped doing the clean water injections so that we can let the aquifer rebound and see what's still there. They're still doing the extractions. They're still doing all the monitoring. All the SVE systems are still running, and they're still monitoring those. We just want to see what the aquifer itself is going to do once it rebounds to where it's supposed to be without all the extra injections.
Well, the last meeting they said they were gonna shut some pumps off and some of the extraction.
They have not shut down any extraction wells. We've only shut down the injection.
So they may start back up again?
They're there. I mean, if based on what we see monitoring wise, if we see the numbers increasing, then we may look at it back and say, well, maybe we need to go back to doing the injections, and we're not quite done with that yet.
Are you sure on that?
For,
About them shutting down and pumping wells?
The injection?
Not the injection.
the extraction wells,
Yeah.
I get the monthly reports. I know that there was one that they had to shut down because they had some the fouling, so they had to clean it, but it came back on.
Well, what they were talking about at the last meeting was shutting them down and seeing what happens. And just to see what happens, you know,
OU7.
there was a few of them that they said
Yes.
they were gonna shut down. And IBM sends us
Yes.
a paper, you
Yep,
know.
OU3 has not been, the extraction wells in OU3 has not been shut down. The extraction wells in OU7 have. And that is what the PRAP is gonna, I'm gonna cover that. That's what the PRAP is gonna be based on next month. OU7, they have shut down.
Yeah, I know they said they were gonna shut some down and see if it came back.
Yes, and that was the plan with OU7, that part on OU7. So those they have shut down, but OU3, none of the extraction wells have been shut down in OU3, just the
Now,
injection wells.
Maybe you could tell me, is the injection well in that purple spot up there, is that on? Or that you said? they
That's an
shut-
extraction well.
Yeah, I know there was an extraction well.
That purple, yeah, that purple, that's an extraction well, where that is.
Yeah.
But none of the injection wells are on.
Is it on? Or?
The extraction well, here,
Yeah,
yes.
the big one's on.
Yeah.
They just changed the thing in there. last
Yeah,
time.
the wells here tend to get a lot of fouling on them, so they have to do a lot of cleaning. They're trying to figure out a way to help lower that, but yeah. I mean, they do get shut down periodically to clean them and stuff, but the extraction wells in OU3 are still running.
But the injection wells aren't.
The injection wells are not.
So that 200 million gallons that they injected last year, they're not injected anymore.
Correct.
So what, it's like a recycle thing, you know, I mean, that they did from the big well that was back there
Mhm.
years ago. Where is that water going now?
Which well?
The way they did it, it's like a big fish tank filter. You know, they take all the water, it goes back to the one that's at the end of the Scranton Garfield, there's a big building there, it's a big extraction well. They
Oh.
put them in way back when the spill happened in like 80, they were
Okay.
the only ones. And they use that, the water that, when they treat it there, 'cause all the extraction wells go to the house. You know what I'm saying?
Okay,
All the
yeah, I went
pipes.
to that one. What, all the extraction wells now are broken up into the different treatment systems around, in OU3.
Yeah, there's only one treatment.
There's at least 3 buildings that I know of in OU3 that treat the water from the different extraction wells.
Well, all the wells go to that one. It's at the end of, I
Okay.
guess, it's Garfield Grant.
I'll go through this, and then I had the groundwater
And
map,
there's-
so I can pull it up, and then we can
and
look
there's
at the map.
Then there's another building right over
Mhm.
here.
Okay.
It's, I know you came in.
Yeah. I have the groundwater extraction, or the groundwater
big
well
ones-
report, so we can pull up the maps, and you can show me where
They're all
it
on
is.
Monroe.
Okay,
One's here, one's right over here, and then there's one.
okay.
So, all those ones up there, I watched the blade pipes, they all go to the extraction well over here. And then they started the injection wells, okay? And they made like a system that went just like this. And all the water is going to that one on the main site, you know, the parking lots and all that. It all goes to that extraction well over there. So what I'm asking, if they shut it down, where's the water going?
They're not shutting down that extraction well. They're not shutting down any of the extraction wells in
Yeah,
OU3.
But that water from when it went from the extraction well,
It's gonna get treated,
it got clean.
I think
and
I
then
understand what
they-
you're talking,
they
I think I
sent it
understand what you're
out
saying.
for
It's
the
gonna end up
injection.
getting discharged back to, well, some of the water right now gets used in the Huron property for their production and whatever activities they have going on. That's something that IBM is gonna have to figure out. If they're gonna be, the balance is gonna be used on Huron, if it's gonna end up getting discharged to the sanitary system, and they're gonna have to work with Endicott as to what the requirements are gonna be that they're gonna have to meet.
Well, that's good. So some of that water is recycled, it's actually used rather than dumped to waste. I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah, some of it goes back through Huron, so
What percentage do you know?
I don't,
Okay.
I don't know. The soil vapor assessment, offsite, that all started in the early 2000s. They put in all the mitigation systems. Currently, they have, systems installed on 460 properties. I believe they have 513 systems currently operating right now, that they maintain, and they reimburse the residents for the electrical power. And they still have 16 properties that require action from the owner, either you know, like it says, either the building doesn't have electricity, it's not safe for them to enter, or the property owner has declined and doesn't want a system.
So that covers how much of an area? 460 properties. Is that like
300 acres.
300 acres?
Yeah. I have a map that shows it. I don't believe I have it in here, but I have it.
Next one.
Mark that one. Oh. Thanks, Frank. This shows the limits of the ventilation systems. So this area down here is pretty much covered the OU3 area. This one over here is the OU4, which came from the Ideal Cleaners, which we'll talk about. And then there's OU4. This is the Ideal Cleaners, which is OU4.
And that's on what road?
Jackson.
Thank you.
They were next door to 6 Jackson Avenue. A friend of mine, Craig Vincent, grew up there as a kid,
Mm-hmm.
and he's a movie star now, but
Is he?
he has leukemia.
Ooh,
So
and he's how
it's
old?
in remission, but he was right next door to the Ideal Cleaners, but Ideal Cleaners is also across the street from IBM and the old buildings that they used to dump chemicals in the ground, where I worked at one point.
Now, is Ideal Cleaner still open?
What's that?
Is it still
No,
open?
the building's
No,
gone.
building's down.
Demolished it, and they
Right.
cleaned it up with a thermo removal. They'd heat up the ground and vaporize whatever liquid was in the ground, and they'd collect it and they wouldn't put it in the air, and they'd collect it and get rid of it.
Hmm.
They did that how many years ago, Mark? Jim?
2010.
Frank? Anybody know? 10?
At least 10
10
years.
years.
about.
I'm going to go with 2010, because that's when we issued the rods. So 2010, 11, and that was
Sounds-
probably when it started.
Sounds right.
Yeah, it costs
Frank.
Hey,
millions.
Rick, welcome
Millions to
back.
big
Oh,
building.
well, I'm just visiting.
I understand.
Well, it was pretty much OU4. They did the thermal treatment and.
Jackson and what? Yeah, what's in
Groundwater.
Cross Street?
It was Jackson and North, wasn't it?
Yes.
Jackson North.
North. This is just showing the progress of the plume from 2007 to 2015. PCE and TCE were both non-detect in the area by 2015. There is still some TCE left in 2015, and there's a little bit of the vinyl chloride also left in 2015. But CIS, DCE, and vinyl chloride are breakdown products of PCE and TCE. So as those degrade, then you're going to have.
But that's still down there at the Ideal Cleaners.
Yep,
Mm.
and actually this is OU4. I have the map with me, which is much easier to read than this. There's still a little bit of vinyl chloride and TCE right in this area.
What kind of detection standards do you use to
They
say,
have monitoring walls there. They're like pipes and all along. the
how
street.
sensitive are your detection standards?
I would have to pull up the graph to tell you what the method detection limit is, but usually it's quite low for.
Ms. Leclerc, are they still doing air sample quality tests in the residences?
To go along with the soil vapor intrusion issues,
Right.
Stopped, I think.
I'd have to go back and look. I haven't looked at the latest report yet.
Yeah, I believe Alex said they stopped,
I
right?
was gonna say, I haven't seen any indoor air numbers for the residences. I only get the data, I've only seen the data that's coming out of the sub-slab data for the residences.
Question. Is that same approach being used with the buildings that Huron now owns, or is that, I'm sorry, I was late from the beginning, so I didn't catch that you said there was any vapor intrusion being alleviated from the former IBM facility, any of those 62 buildings?
They have 3 systems that are going in this year.
Oh, okay.
Subslabs.
And it just started this year, or?
They just redid the soils, they redid the indoor air from 2005. They just got done redoing that.
Oh, okay.
Indoor air sampling for 14 of the buildings. And based on that data, 3 of the buildings are getting systems.
And why are they getting systems based on what data? What are they picking up?
Based on the indoor air data, they're above DOH standard of 2.
Hopefully
two
the
for
buildings
TC.
that were the worst cases, such as Building 46.
Once I get done, I can go back and show
Yeah,
you the
well,
map.
Building 46 had 120,000 micrograms per cubic meter in the dirt
Yes.
at the time.
That is
And
one
then
system.
Building 47 across the street by the viaduct had 800,000 micrograms per cubic meter in the soil at the time, so it was pretty extensive.
And what are
I
they,
worked in those buildings too.
46 is one of those.
What's
and
that?
and you worked in
46,
those buildings for how
45.
long?
Well, I worked for IBM for 28 years, starting in 1974, and I was out in 2002.
So you were exposed to that? Those
Yeah,
concentrations.
daily basis. I wasn't a white shirt and tie guy. I was a manufacturing engineer.
So do
And
you
I
have
went
any,
through all
do you have any
buildings, so-
cancer? Do you have any cancer? Do you have any cancer issues?
Any wood? No.
You better find some wood, like real.
No wood. I have respiratory issues, but it's asthma, and that didn't come from.
You don't think it's related?
No, but I'm very lucky.
I'll let you go.
I'm very lucky. Anyway, I'm sorry.
No, you're fine. So that was OU4. OU5, again, they did the thermal treatment. At OU5, they're still doing the groundwater extraction. Again, the source area has almost been completely eliminated. The soils under Building 57 have reached unrestricted use, actually. The groundwater is still being contained in the groundwater pumping system that's there for the bedrock.
And has all the residue contaminated soil gone?
That's another.
It wasn't
private ground.
removed. It was a thermal treatment, so the soil wasn't removed.
It wasn't
They
removed?
cooked the soil and it
Vaporized
vaporized
everything.
it, and they collected it and cleaned the. So just to show you the progress, the areas that are colored before were areas that they did the subslab sampling for and found the higher levels. And then this is the post-source zones. And they're all below the unrestricted use objectives. And here's the actual soil numbers. And they're all below the unrestricted use. Says DCE is the same as the unrestricted use, but those are the actual numbers once they got done. Those are the max numbers that were found under the building once the sampling got done.
So what did they actually find? Point to which one it is that they actually found the results. What results are you?
These over here, these are their actual results.
That's the actual
Yeah.
results? Okay, that column.
And then this is the unrestricted soil use numbers. But because it's an industrial site, they really only had to clean up the commercial, but they managed to reach unrestricted use numbers.
So it's below the unrestricted levels.
Yes. In the soil. The soils are unrestricted. OU6 is the bedrock groundwater plume. And again, once they found it, they started doing groundwater extraction and treatment, and that is continuing. And then Rob was issued in 2009.
How long have they been doing the groundwater extraction?
For OU6, probably the 1980s, I would say.
1980s.
they've been.
That's a pretty good year. 1979 is when they revealed to you guys, DEC, that they dumped 4,100 gallons of melted chloroform in the ground. 1979,
And that's when the IBM donated that fire truck to the village.
whatever.
So that's OU6, and this is the groundwater plume as of 2015.
What do the colors mean?
The blue is the capture zone for that extraction well, the EN D49, and the green is the VOC plume. And OU7, and that's the northwest area. Based on the consent order that was signed, they were required to do assessments of the sewers and a groundwater assessment. There's sewers and there's another one, I can't think of it off the top of my head. But both of those were done. And then a few years ago, they approached us to ask if they could do a shutdown test to see if the numbers are going to decline, if we should just do monitoring natural attenuation. Alex approved that back in 2014. The data has come in. There was not a lot of significant change in the data that we were seeing after the shutdown, so it's been 3 years now. There was some fluctuation. You could see where the groundwater table has, or the groundwater flow has shifted slightly to the west. Most of the numbers have stayed the same, decreased. There's 2 wells that the numbers did increase in. Part of that could be just natural breakdown, attenuation, so the SIS numbers are responsibility if they want to spend their money and go after somebody else because they think it's partly the railroad's responsibility, because that's,
Well, technically, Jess,
That's,
I
you
don't know
know-
if you know this too, but the original 4,100 gallons in 1979 was in the back of Building 18 where Conrail's property was and where the railroad was. So some of that spill, it wasn't next to the railroad tracks, but it was in the vicinity of Conrail property. And IBM, last I recall, this was many years ago, I was much, much younger then. But as a matter of fact, I was only working for IBM for 5 years at the time. So I didn't get all the details, but I think IBM, as I recall, I had to contact Conrail and tell them, we had this accident, we had this spill, it's under the ground, we don't know if it's on your property, because I don't know how the railroad companies deal with real estate. How deep do you go under the tracks before it's not their property anymore? I don't know. Nobody knows that. But I'm sure IBM had to notify them because it was somewhere near the railroad tracks. And because they had to dig the dirt out and dispose of the dirt. And that was the first time that the public, that day should be etched in Endicott residents' minds, but it's not. That was the first time that the public was told in the newspaper that IBM had contacted the DEC and said, oops, we had a 4,100 gallon methyl chloroform spill. And oh, by the way, I had a good friend that worked in solution maintenance at the time, and he worked at IBM for many years. And he was there when that happened, not right there when it actually dumped, because nobody was. But he said it was a lot more than 4,100 gallons. He said,
What year is that?
and I don't know, but it's anecdotal. Again, he said it was over 25,000. But he said we didn't ever really get the real number, but they only reported 4,100.
And what year is that? What year is that one?
1979.
Now, do you have any background water standards or testing for this area? Like, how do you know what was originally here before IBM spilled? Was there any background information?
I think our records go back to the early 80s for groundwater.
They didn't start testing groundwater till that time.
About, 1980s probably when we started.
See, one thing, Vera, pardon me, one thing about corporations and capitalism and all that stuff, there were restrictions and regulations back then, but there was a lot of stuff that any corporation that dealt with those kind of materials and chemicals largely had control over themselves. And they wouldn't ask for government interference unless they absolutely had to, if they thought they were violating anything. And IBM was a good corporate citizen back then, on paper and visibly, as far as Endicott residents were concerned. And I personally took courses at IBM for the Department of Transportation, DOT, and there was another one. They had to have yearly meetings with books this thick on the DOT regulations when they ship barrels of chemicals to and from Endicott's docks. And that was going on for 30-some years. And so they had to live up to all those restrictions when they were transporting the chemicals, when they were delivering them, and then when they were transporting the empty barrels, and they had to have all these things marked. So IBM was really a good corporate citizen at that time. However, they didn't report a lot of stuff that they were dumping. And that's why we're here sitting in this room today. That's how that works.
Is there anybody, well, our coalition used the track also to clean up in West Endicott, for example, the Canada Dry Company and Atlantic Design. I think it used to be Lignacraft. Are you overseeing that now too, or is that a different person, or is that just all cleaned up and nobody's?
I have no idea. What were they again though? And I'll look to see if I can find the project manager.
Canada Dry over in West Endicott. And
See, when the
There's the Atlantic
TC issue
Design.
came out, they went and found a lot of
Sorry,
different
what was the other one?
TCs.
Atlantic Design.
Atlantic Design.
It'd be
Is
interesting
that
to
the
see what,
same- Is it the same as Maple Street?
yeah, Atlantic Design,
Maple
it
Street.
used to be Lignacraft, is now, that's Maple. I forget what road the Canada Dry was
I
on.
can look and let you know if we have anything on
The
them.
last time
I'm
we
not
had a
familiar with
meeting-
them.
The last time we had a meeting with them, they were talking about doing a certain cleanup, and it was like $1 million cleanup, remember?
So who is they, when you say they were talking about cleanup?
The
Who-
DEC.
DEC?
Did you want this cleanup, or did you want this
Do you
cleanup?
remember who gave the presentation on that?
They were different people.
It was a while ago.
I'll see if I can find project managers for you.
So it sounds like you had so much industry here. It's industry upon industry. It's like a giant industrial park.
Yeah.
And,
Used to be.
And now we got leachate.
and now you have leachate and continued industry and continued avenues of pollution.
Are you
So it's
overseeing the
been going
leachate?
on for like, what,
Or are
50
you-
years,
no.
60
Well,
years?
Now you got kids eating Tide bubbles, you know what I mean?
Going on for about 100 years in this area.
Yeah, the circuit card manufacturing stuff really took off in the 50s. How I know that, I was single digits, but my father worked for IBM for 33 years. And he worked on a program called SMS and SLT. Can't remember what those mean now. He used to tell me. And it was basically these little, what we would consider circuit cards for toys nowadays. But back then, they were used to go in the boards for the 360 and 370 systems, IBM systems. And he knew that there was a lot of chemical involvement there, but it wasn't as much chemical involvement as occurred in the 70s, because by that time IBM had, they were like the tortoise and the hare, Aesop's fable. They were the hare. They were so far out in front of all the other companies that were making if you want to call them computer circuit cards or circuit boards for, this kind of technology, advanced technology. Nobody else was even close. It wasn't until the late 70s, early 80s when they started to get competition. So they had been going full blast with all their chemical stuff, with all their manufacturing, and then somebody else says, oh, we can do it cheaper, and then, well, everybody knows the rest of the history of that is.
So how are the cancer rates for this area? Do you have like special graphs for that or statistics?
Slightly elevated for workers and for the inhabitants. But the problem with the DOH study,
The DOH study, and what,
NIOSH, the NIOSH.
first I was going to talk about the DOH study, Department of Health.
and when was that done, the
The
DOH study?
OU3, they studied the homes
right.
in this area. It was slightly elevated, but the problem was they didn't expend extra resources to track down the people that moved out of the area who had been here the longest time and were exposed to most of the chemicals.
Right.
And in the study group included people that moved into the area who hadn't been here that long. So it's, you
It's
have
like
to question
skewed.
how accurate it was.
Right.
Jim is right about that, plus NIOSH made the same mistake.
Yes, they included people that only worked there a few months.
And what is NIOSH? What does that stand for?
National Institute of Occupational Safety and Health.
Yes.
So that's a
Part of
federal,
OSHA.
is that federal?
That's a federal organization. They're the same, they're the federal organization that's also like the ATSDR, that's the disease registry.
Weren't they supposed to come back with the child study? I don't think we ever got that.
Oh, that's right, I forgot about that.
From, oh, yeah.
We're gonna, what was that, Mark?
We never got that.
All these,
I guess my question-
all these reports are
I
in
know
the library,
you're in a room
Oh, that's
full of
right,
people
yeah,
down
down.
here.
Endicott Library.
Are they still up on the second floor?
I don't know that.
Frank, are they still up on the second
But-
floor?
That
I don't know where the
spot up there,
reports
I
are,
guess
but
now
you
moved
can get a listing of the reports online.
Extraction wells behind me.
And then you go there and they'll give them to you.
So they
Do you-
could never clean me up unless they put an extraction well in front of me. You see what I'm saying? So everything just gets pulled through my building
Yeah,
Pull,
he's like ground zero.
you're ground zero, right?
with no cleanup.
What do you mean, no cleanup? It still
I'm
needs,
assuming more extraction will probably be part of their proposal. when They do their feasibility study.
Well,
Oh, you
the
wanted to.
injection well, they put one right on the side of my building, which they were gonna make a mound of water underneath the building so it went around me. Cause that's the biggest pump, the one that's
Okay.
right behind me.
Okay.
But think I can never get cleaned up unless they clean up 18 and the whole spill, you know?
So you're saying what
If
then?
they turn on the injection well,
Say that again?
they turn on the injection well, I would like to know, because they're gonna have a mound of water underneath me.
Okay.
Supposedly, my lawyer told them it was okay, so.
So are you saying there's still high concentrations of the plume under your building?
I know
Yeah,
what
he's the
injection
highest
well you're talking
contaminated
about.
area.
The
They
big-
did a pilot test for it, and it ended up failing the pilot test, because they weren't getting what they wanted. It wasn't doing what they thought it was going to do. So it only ran, I think, for a couple of years, and they shut it down.
Well, they actually, in the beginning, I fought them, you know what I mean? So they put one over in the parking lot by Washington Ave, and it was doing what they wanted to do over there.
And what is
You were
that?
concerned that the water's gonna damage your foundation,
Well,
right?
I'm sinking as it is.
Oh, you are
know.
sinking, at this
yeah.
point?
My building's sinking.
And they never really did much of a study on, this was one of my pet peeves. They never did really much more than one elevator's worth of study on, and it was Building 18's elevator. It was I'm gonna call it a freight elevator. It went from the basement of 18,
Actually-
one, all the way up to the 3rd floor. And I requested that the elevator shafts in all the buildings that had high concentrations of soil contamination from toxic chemicals, like the numbers I gave you before are actual numbers because they came from you and, not you personally, the DEC and the Department of Health did a study in 2000, I'm going to say 5. And they tested the soil under the subslabs. Well, the numbers I gave you were those results. And there were elevators in the buildings that had the highest concentrations. Elevators in 46, elevators in 47, elevators in 18. And 18 is the only one, and I don't think Alex had to talk to this. I think it was the guy before him.
Bill Wirtz. Bill Wirtz.
Yes, Wirtz, that's right. He didn't like me either. And we had a conversation, you know, about the elevator, and they said, oh, it came back good. And the way they went about testing it, I disagreed with. They put it inside the elevator car. They didn't bother testing the inside of the shaft itself. And they only did one elevator. And my contention, and I still continue to keep that, is that there is vapor intrusion going in those elevator shafts and has been for ever since day one. And the building that, wait, Jim, the building that I'm talking about specifically was 46. That had 120,000 micrograms per cubic meter, and they were closest to the railroad tracks. And this elevator shaft was within the proximity of, I don't know, 20 yards of you know, the contamination, and it wasn't far away from the original spill down the tracks. And yet, at the time, again, not your fault. At the time, DEC wasn't interested in doing all the elevators. And had they done that, and by the way, there were people working in those buildings in 46. There was even a company that made pancake flour up on the 4th floor of 46. And they used that elevator. So it really amazed me, and that's why I've become so cynical about this for a long time, because it just never seemed like, maybe it was because of the permission that IBM gave, or not the permission that EIT and Huron gave. I don't know, you know, I don't know all the real reasons. I mean, your organization and IBM and Huron have all had discussions that are probably way over my head. But what we saw is what this group was involved in, trying to say, okay, let's get to the bottom of this. And my part of it was for the employees that worked there. I was a organizer for a union, and we were trying to organize IBM. But that aside, I was involved with this group because I was concerned about the employees' exposure to vapor intrusion in those buildings, in basements, not just, and they worked in the basements. And I found out from one of our, who's still assemblywoman, Donna Lepardo, told me that she did an investigation. This was a long time ago. She found out that the industrial limit for micrograms per cubic meter was somewhere in the neighborhood of 500,000.
Yes.
And so a person working behind a machine that gave off those fumes, it was safe for them to work there if they were getting less than 500,000 micrograms per cubic meter of vapor while they're working there. And I know what machines they're talking about, and they didn't provide air masks or tanks. They were like happy-go-lucky, drinking a cup of coffee and running their panels. I know, I was there, I worked there.
That's a federal OSHA standard.
What's that?
That was a federal OSHA standard.
Yeah, I know,
There's
and
that
you tried to get it changed, and
They
wouldn't-
did change it.
Oh, it did change it
Yeah.
finally?
So
Well,
what
it's
is,
too late for a lot of people.
what's the
Right.
change to what amount?
It's tremendously lowered. I can't remember the new figure, but it's,
Yeah, I don't know.
Well, the indoor number for residences, I don't know if this applied all the way around, but was 5 micrograms per cubic meter.
Now, what about for the industrial workers?
Much
No,
higher than that.
I don't know what it got changed to, but it came down from 500,000. I think it was 500,083.
it was over
What were the,
500,000.
I can't remember, what were the sub-slab elevator results for the elevator shaft? that
For
they
eight,
did
well, it
test?
was only for one elevator, and it was 18, and at the time, Bill Wirtz assured everybody, including me, regrettably, that they didn't see any problem, but I thought the test was done incorrectly, and because they were measuring what's in the car. That's a good thing. I don't debate that. But what they also should have been doing is measuring the actual shaft itself outside of the elevator, and like put a measurement piece of equipment on top of the elevator as it went up. You know, something where it wouldn't get crushed when it went to the top floor, and something, you can't put it on the bottom, even though there's a space below. Maybe they could have done that, but I know they did put a device in the well of the elevator, and they put one in the car. But the well, I felt that it wasn't enough. And on top of that, it was only one elevator, and there were several. And as a matter of fact, I'm going on and on here, but as a matter of fact, Building 46 had an elevator that went, let's see, is it 46 or 41, sorry. Building 41 had an elevator that the contractors used for transporting their materials when they were inside IBM, like putting additions on, wrecking sheetrock, putting new sheetrock up, building wet lines, chemical lines, and they transported that on these little golf carts with, I think they were some sort of gas, not petroleum gas. It was like the gas used for a grill, I believe. And those fumes were exited from the vehicle right into the aisle as they drove down the aisle to the elevator. Every day, during the time the construction was at its peak, I would say 40 trips a day was not uncommon. So, and there's more than one car. So my point is that they were getting fumes from this gas in these trucks. They were getting fumes, vapor intrusion from the elevator shaft, and that was a bad one. 46 was a bad one. I don't remember what the numbers were for the sub-slab, but it wasn't good. And that got ignored. And again, I'm not blaming you personally, Justin. I mean, this is history. But this is the kind of history that this group has known about. And it's been so long that I'm sure people are forgetting. And, you know, that's the thing. That's the thing that needs to be refreshed.
Rick, you had a graph up there that showed the shale, contamination in the shale. I believe that shale that they're talking about was at the base of the elevator. Some of the elevators dug down into the shale.
It's possible.
They
It's possible.
actually put dyes down that well, okay?
Dye?
Dye.
Okay.
And they ended up on my side of the road in those miles. It's 'cause,
Yeah.
well, the pumps pull.
Yeah,
That big
yeah, well,
extraction.
you know what? The other thing is, Building 46 was built in, guess what year? 1946. Basically, the cement and concrete buttresses that made that elevator shaft what it is, did not do well over 50, 60 years, and they cracked, and, you know, I mean, I don't know how much repair was done, but you're gonna get vapor intrusion after 50 or 60 years of an elevator shaft, you know?
You're right about the chemical fumes in elevators. I was at Trucker for a while, and every time you go in there, you can
Oh, yeah?
smell chemical fumes.
Oh, yeah? Oh, yeah.
Very definite.
Now, is
But
any-
anyway,
is anybody in
you know,
these buildings
The
now?
history is really,
Oh, yeah.
it's like this.
They're leasing all the
Yeah.
buildings
It's
out
like
to different
that.
companies now.
Yes,
Like a big
I've tried
complex.
going through some of it.
What's called.
Yeah, I know,
Current
I know,
campus.
it's mind-boggling.
It's like trying to
What
drink out
boggles
of a fire
us,
hose.
Even
well, on our
BAEs
side,
over
what
there.
boggles us is that they got away with it for so long, and that stuff went on so long. That's what's mind-boggling.
Mhm.
And horrible, because people died from it.
Understandable.
And there's still people in these buildings?
Yes, but now they're not even a public company on Wall Street anymore, so all the company, BAE is maybe a public company, but BAE is a government, they've overtaken Building 14 and some of the operations in some of the other buildings, I think. And they're considered a government installation now. BAE is a government installation, just like WEGO was when it was a Federal Systems Division for IBM. Same status.
And
Am I-
Binghamton
am I wrong, or is that
University is
right?
over
Yeah,
there too.
correct.
Okay.
But you'll never clean it up and get rid of the buildings and take the source away.
Unfortunately, a lot of it, it's inaccessible, unless you do the thermal, like what was done in Building 57. But if there's ongoing operations, it's very difficult to do any of that type of
So
work
we
if
gotta
people are
live-
operating
We
in it.
gotta live with it.
Until somebody comes up with some new technology.
To do which work?
I was gonna say, they're talking about how there's still chemicals underneath the building, and
Yeah.
pretty much the thermal work that was done in Building 57 did a great job, but that's not something you can do in these buildings right now, because they're operating. They have people in there, they're running businesses.
So they're running businesses in polluted buildings?
Well, the basements at least.
Well, even at 57, while they were frying the ground, BAE was in there, you know. And all the buildings were pretty much empty when we had the floods. These people all came after the flood.
That's building 46. The ones that are still operational is building 46? They're still operational?
Yeah, they're still working in
46 is
46.
EI,
Yeah,
some
yeah.
of BAE, but that's when they're gonna put sub-slab system. I
Mhm.
was really amazed when I heard that, because
Yeah.
why didn't they do it before?
They didn't have any pressure
I,
to do it before, Mark.
I had a sub-slab for since 2004. But, and then, actually BAE's in 41 now, because they moved
yeah.
most of the 41 I3ers up to Binghamton. They call it Big I3 East.
Yeah.
And so BAE's sort of taking that building over. BAE's got most of 18. There's a little bit of I3 there where they have their chemical platers and stuff because they can't move that stuff. And then next one's.
And by the way, just, I don't
that's
want to,
all offices.
I don't want to sound like a know-it-all, but everybody else here that's been here for the duration knows as much as
That's
I do.
all BAE.
The difference is that I work there, and I don't know how many other people here actually work there. So it's not all about what I know, but,
Everybody worked there.
Well, yeah,
and
yeah.
their moms
A lot of the
worked
people that were-
there, and their
Yep,
grandparents. I got a picture in my coffee shop. My grandmother was alive.
Nick's
There you
mom
go.
worked there, didn't she die from cancer?
yeah, Jim worked there, he
I
knows.
also worked there in the late 2000s, and at the time I was working on my bachelor's degree. But I started a documentary. I was still employed there. Now I'm a professor of communications at SUNY Broome, and really trying very hard to finish this documentary. But that's the road that this took me through. Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, we've turned all into, I know Vera knows this very well personally, and she should be lauded for all the work that she's done. But we've all personally taken an activist point of view, because unfortunately, that's what you have to do. Your agencies are doing what you're required to do, and you're doing something that represents the New York State residents, and you're doing something that represents the corporations. You have to. because you're in New York State, you're an agency, and you're appointed to do the job you're doing. But you're not allowed to be activists, you have to be neutral, and you have to look for the numbers, and you have to, okay, this is what we know, these are the facts. And that's why a lot of times, people like us would have 10 times the information that you would have only in anecdotal form. There's nothing we could do. In the early times of this group's meeting, when they had the DEC and the DOH as a concert meeting, they would, get up and talk to us about things, and we would offer information. Well, we know people that have this wrong. When I was working for our Alliance at IBM as a staff union organizer, I put together an online document where they could, it's called a health survey for IBM employees, whether they were current or former. And they could fill it out online and send it to me. And I had a stack of papers about that. I still have them somewhere, unless my wife threw them out. And they're about that deep of people's personal experiences. And I offered some of those to the DEC and the DOH at the time. It was mostly the Department of Health that refused to even talk to me about it. They weren't nice about it.
Just as a side thing, the DOH project manager has also changed, just as you mentioned.
Say that again?
The DOH project manager has also changed. Scarlett is no longer working on Endicott.
Okay, well, the guy I was referring to was Gary Litwin.
I didn't know they were still involved.
Or it wasn't Scarlett, I'm sorry.
They're still involved in some
There was,
capacity?
Bridget. Bridget?
There's a real good young guy, and he moved.
Justin.
Yeah, he moved.
Justin is now Julia's boss, who,
Okay, he-
Julia Kenny is the new DOH project manager, and Justin's one of her bosses.
Yeah, he was
Justin had been at the UE auditorium
just
meeting
Debbie.
along with, yeah, I can't remember the girl's name. Younger woman.
Wasn't Justin the same guy that, or
Justin
maybe I'm
Bennett.
thinking somebody different. Who was here with Mary J. Peachy when we talked about the pollution that EIT dumped from the sewage treatment, or whatever they called it?
That might have
Maybe it wasn't Justin.
Oh, Dan something.
I remember Gary Litwin.
Yeah,
Gary Litwin, yeah.
They started bringing that stuff in, just
He was there.
Yeah.
valve broke and the whole tank went to the ground.
Now, if there's people still in these buildings, are they using special air filtering systems for these workers?
I don't know.
Does anybody know?
Well, this is what they're trying to do now. They're
Well,
putting
we got,
some
yeah,
slabs.
we got the systems going in. Other than that, I'm not really sure
I mean,
what.
air filtering, special air filtering systems?
As far as DEC and DOH, we can only control so many things, because a lot of times they're still employees, which means that they fall under NISDOH and OSHA, and our regulations don't necessarily apply to employees. So
Exactly.
What about OSHA's level of protection?
OSHA's levels are much higher than what DOH has for their standards.
Works the employee standards.
Yeah. The OSHA numbers are higher than the
OSHA
residential.
OSHA employee standards versus DOH
DOH
employee.
residential. Well,
Oh,
DOH doesn't
okay.
have employee,
Okay,
they
so
only
it's
have,
not-
they
it's
only
not
have
the two
residential.
Okay,
Yep,
okay, so it's not employee.
no.
So I didn't realize the DOH was even involved. I wonder if we should invite them to a meeting to see what they've been up to the last few years.
They were invited.
I mean, to give a presentation.
Do you plan on having like public meetings, you know?
Well, we're gonna be having the public meeting, when we do the PrAP release for OU7. The health department will be there, and then we'll have another one when we do OU1 and 2.
Because these neighborhoods is such a turnover.
Mhm.
These people have no idea what's happened here.
Okay.
You know what I mean? They don't know what a ventilation system is on their house. It was funny because at one point, way back when, we had a guy, his name was Pete Little. He was going around, going to doors, doing a survey, and the lady was a newscast thing, and she didn't know she was living in a contaminated house. I forget what her name was. He knocked on the door and she didn't know. Here she's doing stories on this crap and didn't know she was living in a contaminated house.
She was doing stories on what, IBM?
Yeah, the contamination. She didn't know she was living in a house. He was going around and doing surveys. She was a blonde.
forgive me.
Oh,
So-
that's the reason.
Walter Hang of Toxic Targeting had recommended what they should do here is put underground barriers to help contain and keep the chemicals from spreading. I think he said the regular pumps are containing it well enough where they didn't think it was necessary to put any underground barriers. Do you concur with that?
I haven't looked, I will be very honest with you, I have not looked at enough of the data to be able to say yes or no to that.
Because there was a site, a gun manufacturing plant up in Ithaca where they contaminated with TCE, and they put underground barriers, they dug up the soil, and it was cleaned up like in no time. But I guess,
So what are you saying that Walter Haynes said?
he says, what they should do here in Endicott, put underground barriers, like a metal,
Right.
to keep.
But as a sidebar, I remember, and I have these communications, Walter Haynes was extremely critical about the status of this remediation effort.
How long ago was that?
2 years, I did it as a presentation at Buffalo.
I sent him the recent results, so he didn't comment on it.
Basically, there is a barrier, okay? Right down Monroe, they have extraction wells, the whole one. It really can't go past there
And
anymore.
I think that's what Alex indicated.
And what kind of a barrier is it?
They're extraction wells, they suck all the water.
Suck the
So
water,
There's a line of
water
extraction.
filter it
goes-
before it could
The
go
water goes
any
down
farther.
there, ain't going nowhere.
And they have monitoring wells beyond that to show that it hasn't spread?
Yes.
And that's where it's got, at the back of the plume, it started showing less, especially after the flood.
So the flood seemed to help
Well, it gave the water to flush it.
to flush it.
So how many pumps are they gonna put under these buildings where the hot spots are yet? Sounds like it's gonna be, is it every 10 or 20 feet, or how are they determining how many they're gonna, in a household, there's 1 or 2 usually. These
Yeah.
buildings are massive, so are they
I'd
gonna
have to go back and look at the design report.
It'd be interesting to know how many extraction pumps they're gonna have, and how
Have
many
you read the
vents on each
report?
building.
Vera, you might like this,
Hmm.
in a negative way.
Hmm.
At one point in time, when Bill Maines was president of Endicott Interconnect Technologies and Huron, there was a piece of property that they had acquired through the purchase of the whole 62 building IBM site,
Hmm.
and it was vacant of any buildings or anything. They were considering fracking.
Yeah,
Really, you mean they were going to put a rig up?
I'm sorry?
What do you mean by fracking?
They were
Lease some of
considering a
their land.
fracking well on the very property where they had already spilled chemicals.
generate
So-
extra income.
Is that
So they were
mind-boggling?
gonna drill,
They
you
didn't do it. They didn't do it.
But they were thinking of it.
Right
No,
downtown
yeah.
here.
So was our mayor down there at the airport on his floor, remember?
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, yeah, yep.
But
The dump
here's
down
the
there.
whole, the real topper is they're planning on bringing all the frack waste here, same place they're bringing the leachate.
Yep.
That was,
That would be liquid
Barbara
frac
Fiel.
waste.
So you have no oversight over the
Clippings.
leachate though, right?
No.
but that has nothing to do with our guests.
Now, if they spill it on site, then I'll probably get a phone call about it, but as of right now, no, I don't have anything to do with the leachate being brought on site.
And just so the next steps are like, in the next month or two, it's like the OU7 and the OU1 and 2.
For OU7, right now, I've developed a prep and is going through the review right now between DEC and DOH and the chain of command. So the prep will be coming out probably next month,
Okay.
middle of next month. And then that's open for public comment, and we'll be doing another public meeting. And that gets public noticed in the paper and on one of the radio stations and stuff. And that's just for OU7. And then by the end of the year, I'm expecting the feasibility study to be coming in for OUs 1 and 2.
And the OU7 was also a feasibility study?
It'll be remedy selection, actually, remedy selection.
When is that coming out?
The prep
Studies?
for OU7?
Recommendations from IBM?
For OU 1 and 2,
For under the
The-
here on campus?
okay. This should be in at the end of the year.
Not till almost a year from now?
The feasibility study for 1 and 2 should be in by the end of this year.
So another 11, 12 months?
Yep.
Okay.
And then, once it's in, we'll be starting the prep, and we'll be selecting our the remedy and then bringing it to the public and commenting period and
So you're still selecting remedies, you still have cleanup plans still going on?
Well, the main thing is they're trying to reclassify it back from a 2 to a 4, where they don't have to do anything.
Who's they?
Marie sent you got that stuff.
IBM.
DEC, what?
The DEC's goal is to always get the sites to a class 4, but
Yeah,
we know that a lot of things have to take place before that can happen.
yeah, but well, that's what the goal is.
Yeah, the goal is always to get to a class 4.
So this way IBM is out of the picture at some point?
Class 2, okay, is action required.
Hmm.
A class 4, no action required. What would you rather have if you lived in a blue house? Got to a blue from a dark purple.
Hmm.
I would like to have something done. But, you know, I'll probably still be a blue and I'll be back to a 2.
Hmm.
I mean, back to a 4. But at every meeting I ask, is there any plans to do any ambient air testing?
Hmm.
As of right now, no. but I'll put
Because
it on
your
my
whole
list.
remedy to this ground thing is to throw everything into the air.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I know it dissipates. Maybe they should be testing Johnson City, Binghamton ambient air, because it blows away from here so fast. If they're getting TCE in there, you know, I don't know.
I got one for you on that too, Jess.
Because I did my own ambient air test, and all I found was real high benzene. I don't know if it's from the cigarette smokers or the
In
cars.
1989.
And then how did you do your ambient air test,
It was
using
a
what?
canister.
Canister, and you were testing just specifically for benzene or other things?
No,
Are
they
there
tested
VOCs?
it for a lot of stuff.
Very accurate,
Oh, yeah?
updated.
In 1989, IBM decided, because of the pressure that was put upon them
Their
by the
answer
federal
was to
government,
throw everything into the air.
to
Right.
reduce the emissions that they were putting out through their stacks on the roof and their ventilation systems from the actual manufacturing areas. And so, because they decided that the use of methylchloroform, trichloroethylene, trichloroethane, perchloroethylene, all those particular chlorofluorocarbon chemicals were a problem, obviously. So they had to change it. I was there when they did this too, in 1989. And they took their circuit panel manufacturing process and they converted it to aqueous. And what I mean by that, obviously water soluble. But what that was prior to that, they used a material in their exposed, develop, and etch process of these mainframe circuit boards that were about tabletop size. And it was a they call it red resist, T160 or T180, I think they call it. Brain's not working total on that. And it was only soluble with methylchloroform or methylene chloride, one of those. And then and that was a stripper, and they stripped that off, and they had to ventilate all that. Well, they decided that to reduce the emissions, they were going to go to an aqueous resist, one that could be dissolved with water. And so that was 1989, and they finally got that going. And once they got it complete, and it was throughout that particular process in Endicott that they used it. They still use some TCE and MC, but for the most part it was aqueous process. When they got done with that, they measured the total output of their stacks. And it came back with that they had reduced the output by 2 million pounds. 2 million pounds of particulate came out of those stacks.
And what kind of particulate, what size?
All kinds.
All kinds?
But mind you too, there was a statistic shortly before this, I think you'll concur with me, that IBM Endicott was the largest producer of particulate air emissions
Yes,
in the
yes.
country.
Yes.
That was a national,
But here's my
And what
here's my
kind of
point.
particulate?
Here's my
There's
point.
different sizes?
Here's my point.
Yeah.
They took out 2 million pounds. And
Yeah.
everybody said, yay! And the federal government gave them an award. Nice
Yeah.
going, guys. Way to go. Applause. But when one thinks about it, one comes to the conclusion that, how long was that going on? So that means that 2 million pounds of particulate and chemical toxic fumes were coming out of those stacks and floating in the air over Endicott, going to JC and wherever else they were, Vestal, for, I don't know, 20, 30 years.
Well, when
And
you
that's
say
gonna
2
have an
million-
effect on, that's gonna have an effect on people's health, especially
Of
in
course.
Endicott.
Well, remember they
Of
did the
course.
computer modeling study and it showed there was an increase in cancer of residents
Right,
downwind
yes,
and
yes.
to the north.
Yes.
And when you say 2 million pounds, how much is it in tonnage?
Oh, I don't know. Well, divide it by 2,000 pounds. That'll give you the tons.
So
Divide 2 million pounds by 2,000 pounds. And that'll give you how many tons?
What is that, 200, 2,000?
Do you know it's a
Is that
high
100
school?
tons?
I don't know, but it was a high.
Come on, Scott.
1,000.
1,000
Thank
tons?
you.
It was
And
Jack
then over
Gilroy.
what period, though? 1,000 tons over what period?
Well, it's a guesstimate. I'm going to say between 30, well, small number, 20 to 35 years. There's no really any way to tell.
Well, right now in my county, Susquehanna County, we have 50 compressor stations, and they allow hundreds of tons of pollution and particulate matter besides VOCs and gases per station, per year.
Yeah, I know.
So you can imagine how many hundreds of tons is being allowed, and
Well,
that's
let me
the
ask you something.
allowable limit of pollution that's being allowed.
Well, let me ask you something. Do you know what the federal regs are on that, or the state regs are on that for what you're talking about? I mean, have you had, well, in Pennsylvania, how about in Pennsylvania?
What the limits are?
Yeah.
The allowable limits, that the allowable limits are hundreds of tons
Oh, my God.
per station.
And that's going into the air.
It's going into the air through
How
the
long that's been going on? 10 years?
Well, right now, we have 50 stations, so they're all different years that they've been
Oh,
built.
okay.
So the past 10 years, they've been put in.
Earliest was 10 years ago, right up
Yes,
till now.
until now, and they're still building new ones. We got 14 engine stations being built right now, 2 stations on over 100 acres in the Kingsley, Brooklyn area. And you're talking 14 engines per station.
See, this is what the residents of all these areas in New York and Pennsylvania are up against. When they're up against a corporation and these kinds of things are happening, and they don't I mean, we've had people come to these meetings in the past and they were asking questions that we already knew the answers to, but they were behind. Yeah, not saying they're stupid, they were just behind. They were naive, they were uninformed, and they didn't know what was going on. And all the time that they didn't know what was going on, it was going on. You know what I mean?
Rick, do you know what prompted IBM to lower those emissions? When the report came out at the high levels after they tested it, it was Jack Gilroy and his class at the Maine Endell High School. All students came down and protested. They got a news. and
What year
stuff.
was that?
I don't know, I've got the news article at home, but it was a long time ago, before,
Okay.
way before they
Well,
got the EPA awards for it.
Like after '89, when IBM got the federal pat on the back and the little plaque that they put up in the CEO's office somewhere, all that changed.
When they
For
changed
good.
over to EIT, they threw out all those awards. They were on the wall, and they just threw them out with the old furniture. IBM didn't care to maintain them.
But like I said, the anecdotal part is the significant part, in my opinion, because the anecdotal part explains what happened before they fixed it.
But the students actually calculated what chemicals were coming out according to the EPA studies, and the percentages and pounds of emissions and everything. They sent up brochures and flyers and part of their protest. And they were the ones that got all that started and got it in the news and stuff.
Right. Yeah, it's an
So it looks
ongoing
like
battle.
if you want jobs, that means you have to endure pollution, all kinds of chemical pollution, and then death by all kinds of disease.
And not only that, but the way...
So you can have a job.
But the way
So this is what we have to suffer through. They say we give you nice jobs, nice paychecks, but you're going to be exposed to all kinds of pollution and death by pollution.
Yeah, well,
and
now, see,
chemicals.
they had nice jobs and nice paychecks, but they were still making the pollution. Now, with this administration, I don't have to tell you that they're trying to make it so there are no health benefits, no pension, crappy wages, and no possibility of it ever getting any better. And that's how they're going to increase the working industrial economy of the U.S. And then we're
That's
going back, we're
because
gonna be
you-
going back, 60,
That's
Is
maybe
there
100
anything
years.
else on
That's
on the
because,
IBM pollution?
that's because
So we
you,
can wrap this up.
Oh, sorry.
you
We'll have our chat.
How far do you have to drive?
that's because
Jack?
you, the worker, we, the workers, are expendable.
Well, I'll get a hold of Trump, we'll build a wall. New York, Pennsylvania.
There's 50 compressor stations in Buffalo County now? So how many, like in the last year?
The past 10 years, 50
50?
workers.
Okay, you got
Just the
Well, 10, now 2 more are being built at the largest ever.
Where
Biggest
you go,
ever.
Syracuse?
They started like 2 engines.
Oh,